So, does everybody hear me now?
I don't know.
Good. I got a thumbs up from Sophie. I see other people popping up on the screen as well. That's brilliant. So welcome. I have the honor. Okay, the screen is populating around me. So I have the honor greeting everyone on the live stream as well as in the live audience, which is smaller than our online audience, which is probably a sign of the times. And okay, so I'm welcoming everyone to this talk that we are proud to present with Jan Bürger and Ulrich from Bülow, who are directors and directors, or how do you call that? Deputy directors of the manuscript archive section of the German Literature Archive.
Something like that.
With their talk with a long title that I don't recall by heart, but it starts with what can we learn from an author's, oh yeah, there it is. What can we learn from writers' papers, which is mainly about an introduction to two archives, Barbara Köhler and Martin Walser, two very prominent recent acquisitions of the German Literature Archive, and we can hope to get an important insight into potential research perspectives on very recent acquisitions in the German Literature Archive. And I'm looking forward to your talk and would like to ask you to take the floor.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. We want to do this talk together, but I don't know, half of our audience knows our archive in Marbach very well, but maybe some of you don't. And so at first, a few words about our archive. Our archive is in some very similar to the Ransom Center. We have a museum and a library and an archive department, but we are more concerned on one subject, and that is the subject of German-speaking literature, from the Enlightenment up to the present. And to this subject, we do collecting everything which is related to the subject. In the archive department, we are collecting all things which are unique. These are written documents and unwritten documents. We will show some examples. And our main question or title is, what can we learn from writers' papers? Because sometimes people ask us why it's necessary to spend so many money, public money mostly, for acquiring the archives, the old papers of writers. But we are of course convinced that it's sensible, and so we want to show you what can you learn from writers' papers, what you can read in their published works.
Yes, well, probably we can make some words on the history of the institution. It's a little bit different than Ransom Center. It started earlier. It started in 1903. It started small and provincial, and then after the Second World War, it started to increase very, very much, and it increased in the direction that we are mainly collecting now papers of contemporary writers. And what we want to do with you today is something really new, because we just want to show you two collections, one of a very famous author, the other one of an avant-garde feminist, not so famous female poet, and two collections which are very, very new. They came in the last month to March.
But the authors are very different. Right?
Yes, totally
different generations, male and female. And also the art of writing the style is very different.
Yes, of course, a narrator and an avant-garde writer,
and East and West,
and everything.
Everything is different.
And we have just a lot of slides, and let's test how far we can go.
Let's begin with the older writer, This is Martin Walser, who was born in 1927. So this is an acquisition we did last year, and it's very huge material of all sorts. It's, I think 75,000 handwritten pages and 75 diaries with 25,000 pages handwritten, and photographs and everything you want. Letters from all over the world, from readers, from publishing houses, and so on. And you could tell from this material the life and works of Martin Walser. You could tell the intellectual history of the Bundesrepublik, the Federal Republic of Germany, the post-war society, because he was a main part, an important part of that. He was a leading intellectual in many phases of this history. He was far left, and at the end he was more right.
Is probably.
He is, of course, he is still alive. And but we want, what I want to show you is the rarities of material and what you can learn about it. One of the oldest document is this photograph. It shows Martin Walser at the age of 8. In Wasserburg, it's on Lake Constance in southwest Germany. Her parents run a railway restaurant and run a coal and wood trade at the same time, where the 3 sons had to help. And from this coal trade, we have the account book. This is coal in German. And if you open it in the middle, you see what you expected, the accounts and the orders and the prices and so on. But if you scroll back to the first pages, you see that there is another thing. There has the young Martin Walser, maybe when he was at school, written some sentences, some text about Friedrich Schiller, his Wallenstein. And on the right-hand side, you see some verses. Maybe it's for sketches for a ballad, maybe in the tradition of Friedrich Schiller. Martin Walser was served as a soldier in in World War II for some months only. He was too young, and after that he began to study in Regensburg. And from this time, you see here the programs of a student theater. And that's very interesting, because maybe there is no collection like this from this not so important student theater, but it's maybe complete. And for this theater, Walser played and sang songs, and he has had written some texts which are unknown up to now. And if you see these programs, you see they are very expensive printed, because this student theater was part of the American re-education program, which intend to re-educate the Nazi Germans, and that's why they are well funded, and I think this program was made from American money. What is it? In Regensburg, at the university there, Walser became friends with a young fellow student named Ruth Klüger. She was at that time only 15 years old. And she was Jewish and has survived the Auschwitz concentration camp. And later she has written about this time. It is a very, in Germany, a bestseller, a very famous book, Weiterleben. I think it's translated in English under the title A Girlhood, a Holocaust Girlhood or something like that. And it's very interesting that they was friends at that time, and here you see a letter, one of several letters, which wrote Ruth Klüger to Martin Walser in the summer breaks, when Martin Walser was on the Lake Constance. And here she wrote about a story Martin Walser has written. It's not known what story it was, but in this story plays a Jewish character a certain role, and Ruth Klüger tries to give him some hints how to present a Jew in this time. It was a long life friendship. Here you see Martin Walser and Ruth Klüger in 1985, I think, at a conference. And some years later, the friendship broke off because Martin Walser has written a novel, A Death of a Critic, about as a kind of roman à clef, about a well-known critic in Germany, Marcel Reich-Ranitzky. And Ruth Klüger has the opinion that this novel was anti-Semitic. And so they broke off the contact. Ruth Klüger, I've forgotten to say, was after this letter from 1947, she went with her mother to the States and was teaching in somewhere in the States, in Irvine and I think Princeton and some other universities and colleges. So after the time in Regensburg, Martin Walser continued his studies in Tübingen. He wrote a thesis about Kafka, and then he didn't continue to study because he wanted to earn money, and a good opportunity was to do it in Stuttgart, where the new radio station was founded. This was in 1949. This is the year when the Federal Republic was founded too. And at this new radio station, he makes some reportage about some everyday things, like here about teeth and how you extinct trees and replace it, or about orchestra from folk orchestra and something like that. And it's very interesting because this accounts, normally accounts are not so interesting, but in this case, this thick bundle of accounts is very interesting because you see what Walser has done in these years. And he has not only makes this entertainment programs, but he was in the political department of this radio station. And there he make reportage about refugees and social problems. And I think in these years, in this formative years of Martin Walser, he learned so much about the society, about all aspects of society, which was a great fund for all his coming novels. And we would have no documents if we hadn't this accounts here. here you see Martin Walser as a young reporter, as a wine taste in a small town near Baden-Württemberg, in Baden-Württemberg. And he was also concerned with young writers. He wanted to present them in the radio station, and he did it with great success. For instance, for the avant-garde writer Arno Schmidt, which was in this year very unknown. But Martin Walser was convinced, and he presented Schmidt in a long portrait, radio portrait. And Arno Schmidt was very excited about this, of course, and he wrote, and he wanted to come to Stuttgart, and he wrote in 1952, "Thanks for your letter and the portrait. You are the first and the only one who recognized and has proven by examples how much and what I able to do. A spring in the desert," and so on. Okay. One of the most important and most known novellas from Martin Walser is the novella Runaway Horse. And here you see on one page, a handwritten page from his manuscript. And the novella is about two guys which are friends and not friends and concurrents a bit, and they make in a storm a sailing trip on the Lake Constance, and they are in one moment they come into an argument, and the main character pushes his opponent into the water, and maybe he is dead. So, and this is, if you want, the turning point in the novella. And Martin Walser wrote here on this page about what was happened there. But his friend and editor, Siegfried Unseld, has a critique. He said it is not good that Martin Walser has so clearly written what his main character has done. Maybe I translate some sentences here. Certainly, Helmut knew what he had to do, and so on. And then he writes explicitly that he pushes his opponent Klaus, named Klaus Buch, into the water. And Siegfried Unseld wrote him, that is not good, it's too clear. He must unclear this scene so that the reader doesn't know if he did it or if it was an accident. And Martin Walser follows this advice, and we formulate this passage. But then he got one of his many reader correspondences. This is from a school from a class in Hamburg, and this novella was was read in many classes at that time. And this class has a question. Dear Dr. Walser, we are reading Runaway Horse, and we want to know whether Helmut Klaus pushes Helmut whether Helmut pushes Klaus with purpose. So, and we don't know what Martin Walser was answering. This is another manuscript for a novel. The novel is titled Breakers. That is interesting because it's the novel where Martin Walser reformulate all his experience with the United States. He was very often in the United States in several universities, except in the years when the Vietnam War was. Then he was never in the States, but before and after that, and he enjoyed very much. And this novel, with the title Breakers, plays on an immersion university at the West Coast, maybe in Berkeley. And here you can see how Martin Walser worked. This is, by the way, all the manuscripts of Martin Walser were handwritten. For this novel, which is in print, I think, 300 pages, he has written 1,200 pages. And he has a special method to write and to combine some particles of reality together, which don't belong together normally. For instance, his main character has a name in this novel, Mers Johann, and he portrayed in a certain sense his friend Uwe Jonsson. You know, this also a very famous writer, which was a close friend of Martin Walser, and he died in 1984. And that was the time when Martin Walser wrote his novel Breakers, and he changed the name of his main character for making him more closely to his dead friend. And when he wrote this novel and other novels too, he couldn't do it without the help of his diaries. He has written diaries since the 50s, and you see here on the left-hand side 4 of them. They are 75, and very thick books, and you see from the outside that is very oft used, because he for example, when he was at a stage when he wanted to describe a party in the university for his novel, then he goes to his diaries and look for some passages where he described real parties and what they are talking about them at these parties and so on. From several universities, several years, several circumstances. And on the right-hand side, you see a note about the headline is party, and then you see the Latin numbers. These are the numbers of the several diaries and some notes. And some of these notes, for instance, a computer or Scandinavianist or something Nietzsche, these are topics of the conversation in the novel. So this is a special method to combine reality and pieces of reality together in a fictional world, to make a fictional world. In the middle of this manuscript, we found this newspaper, the Daily Californian, And at first glance, you think it's by accident there, but it's not by accident, because it has a close connection to the plot in the novel. Because this main character is reading just that article. The main character is a German, a Swabian teacher who was as a visiting professor in the United States, and there he fall in love with one of his students. And but the student has a boyfriend, and he see first time her boyfriend with jealousy, of course, in this newspaper. And he described in this newspaper in detail how he looks like. He looks wonderful. He said, and it's he has another name in this novel, but here you see his right name, Alan Gresham, and I think this real Alan Gresham, maybe he's still alive. He don't know that he is that he occurs in a famous German novel. So that's the things what I wanted to tell you about the papers of Martin Walser. And now we switch to
Let's have some questions. Do you have any questions? I think it's better to ask some questions than to make a one-way communication. If you don't have any questions, I have run through. Yes.
I do, but I'll defer to the people online if there are questions coming from the Zoom call.
Yes.
I don't know. Thorsten, what do you think?
I think the online audience can ask questions, for sure. Also technically.
Yes, probably I can ask my first question to Ulrich. Going back to our title, what can we learn from author's manuscript? And I find really interesting the one point, the probably more common point, that there's the editor Siegfried Unseld who tells his author, your plot has a problem. Yeah. Be more careful. That's the one point. But the other point, that's what we learned here with Das fliehende Pferd.
That some people are co-writers, which we don't know.
Yes. Yeah. So there are some really prominent cases that really the editors really changed the whole style of an author. Mm-hmm. Here's a different. Here's something you want to have the perfect plot, and there's one thing missing. But what is probably more interesting, I never thought about. One thing which is interesting, if you know the novels of Martin Walser and his way of narrating, it's probably more in a special way more conventional. And if he now likes Arno Schmidt is for the German post-war tradition something like the how can I say, the legitimate follower of James Joyce. So he really, it's the Joycean tradition. And it's so suddenly you notice that Walser is a guy who had context to totally different aesthetical concepts and something like that. It was, it's interesting, I think it is.
I think Arno Schmidt was a friend of Finnegan Wakes, of this phase in James Joyce. But Martin Walser was a reader of James Joyce too. And the novel Breakers, which I presented you, this is a kind of, not parody, but it had much to do with James Joyce Ulysses, because it's the journey that the German teachers does in the United States is like the Ulysses who goes far away and come back to his wife. And this is the same structure in this novel, and Walser is educated, sophisticated. And at the end, you know, in Ulysses is a monologue of this women, and in Martin Walser is a long dialogue in the bed between the men and women. Also I think there's a connection too. Maybe the the style of writing is. You are right. This is not the avant-garde style of writing like James Joyce. It's more conventional, more entertainment, if you want.
He wants to tell a good story, and he wants to have his audience, of course. But it is interesting, and also if you look at this period here with broadcasting things, for me, Walser is always an author who has something like a strong personal sound, and he's able to, which is really a piece of art. He's really able to catch you with his sound and bring you over long distances of narration. Probably you think it's not so important for you, but the sound is so nice. And probably, do you think that he learned a lot of writing for radio and just narration, which is really readable, also readable loud for audience?
Yes, it's maybe. He dictate, you saw the manuscripts of him, and the second step is that he dictates them, all the things he has written for his wife, who types this in the typewriter. What do I want to do? I think the time as a reporter was so important because he knew the society so good from this time. Mm-hmm. Some people are make an analog between Martin Walser and Honoré de Balzac, and they call him the Balzac of the Lake Constance, because he has described so many milieus and so much different professions and so on, that you can reconstruct not only the intellectual history of West Germany, but also the social history. Mm. So we have two questions.
First question is, who wants to be first?
Thorsten was the first.
Okay, I was first. Well, just, we have three questions actually. Like it was, when you had this letter up where this class asked. The school class or high school class asked Martin Walser. So, did he push him on purpose? My initial response my initial Walser response was, well, you can ask Mr. Unselt. Thank you. But here comes the serious question. I found, like you are within the framework of the question, what do we learn from authors' papers? The letter or the card that Arno Schmidt writes to Martin Walser is exceptionally interesting, because there's one aspect that we didn't touch upon yet, and that is author politics and politics of attention. Yeah. I would just like to remind everyone that it was 2 years later that Arno Schmidt published Seelandschaft mit Pocahontas, for which he was sued in civil court for indecency. So at this point he was first an unheard author without with a lot of writing but without a voice. Mm-hmm. And not much later he would have been a shunned author and a sued author for indecency. This is a trace of Arno Schmidt connecting with a Martin Walser, whom he did not know would switch camps much later on for support to be heard. And I find that incredibly interesting.
Yes, but I think Arno Schmidt has had also some problems in the beginning of his publications because of this. How can you say this erotic freedom he made in this society? And so probably you are right, and that is one thing which was important, that there's a serious broadcasting company and I have a close contact, and there are younger people, a younger generation, which is very interested in my kind of writing. And so it was important for him, and it's also really interesting for authors' politics or politics of becoming a prominent figure in the literature business, that these broadcasting companies, also paid often by money from the US re-education programs, were so important to rebuild the literary scene of younger authors. And very often this more avant-garde writers, probably Arno Schmidt sold about 1,000 copies or something like that of his first novels. These people really could make a living with that broadcasting programs they could write for this these editors like Martin Walser or Alfred Anders and guys like that. It was so important, and in the same time, it was also something like an intellectual world, and an intellectual academy besides the university. In that Stuttgart radio broadcasting program, also women like Ingeborg Bachmann published a lot, or Theodor Adorno made his big lectures to bring critical theory to a broader, wider audience and something like that.
To sum it up, when we the question, what can we learn from a writer's archive? One answer is you can learn not only things about this author, but about other authors, which are corresponding partners of the author. And the reading, the correspondence with reading is in another way very interesting, because there's a lot of research about reception of an author. But this research is only the published reception. If you want to know how ordinary people did read novels from Martin Walser, I think the best source would be the letters of the readers. And you can't find another source. So that's only a thing which many people don't expect in an archive from a writer. Things like that.
So, but I think we have 2
I
questions.
might add to that, from just the examples you've shown us, this is an archive that could be used by social historians and cultural historians too, because clearly Martin Walser was a conduit. He was collecting information in these extensive diaries, lots of perceptions, experiences, observations that probably didn't even make their way into his fiction, and yet could be testimonials of a time period that one could use, not just to understand his work in a different way, but to understand the time period. But my question, though, was regarding this mass of material, because it's an enormous amount. To what extent does the archive pay attention to or care or ask if there's been any censorship, self-editing, cleansing, purging of an archive like this? So I presume this is, he's a living author, he donates it himself. He seems not to have taken anything out because it's so extensive. But is that a question that concerns the archive? To what extent this might be skewed? There might be a perspective. He might take out less flattering documents in his life. He seems to be including everything, but I wonder if that's a question that gets asked when an author donates his works.
There are different authors, different type of men. If you compare, for instance, the papers of W.G. Sebald, who was very aware of how you can, how archivists work and how a scientist work with archives. And I think he was very organized, and he organized his papers for the posthumous. But there is another type of writers and men, and I would call it the chaotic. And Walser was from this type. He has a really huge house on the Lake Constance. And I think he simply don't know what he have in all his rooms, in all his cellars and small rooms and so on. We was there some days, And I think he was unable to censor his own papers because it's such a huge mess, and he has never organized that because he never moved, for instance.
You are totally right. It's an interesting question, and it's a question you never can find a real solution for everyone. Every case is a single case, and probably like a normal, in the life of people who don't want to write and who don't want to have a collection of their papers, it's very normal that there's something in your life you don't want to read for the following generation, and it's nothing with censorship. Often it's only private, and there are very, very often authors which haven't got big flats or something like that, and just finishing a book and thought oh, the manuscript, I just throw it away because I haven't the room and it's over, and now I have the book and that's all, and that's legitimate. It's quite okay to make that. So we have. And with every negotiation with an author, we have the different cases. And of course, we as an archivist always say, oh, don't throw it away, just give it. And if you don't want to have read it in the next 30 years, then try to.
Yes.
No. I'm sorry I came in late, but I was wondering about the process of acquiring papers like this. So you must have a lot of writers who offer their papers to you at Marbach?
Yes, we have a lot more offers than we want
so
to have.
That must be kind of a tricky issue, telling someone you don't want their papers. So Martin Walser approached you and offered you his papers, and you said you were interested, and then there's a financial negotiation that happens. And
it's different. We have a lot of offers, and I think the main things I do is to prevent us from all these papers. But in many times, these are writers and authors who never published a poem, but had written a lot of them, and so we can't take all this stuff. But there are other cases, famous writers or writers we think they are important. Then we are the guys who talk with them and to want to have these things. And Martin Walser was the second type. We have a long connection with him. He has held many speeches in Marbach for exhibitions, or it's a long history between our archive and Martin Walser, and that's not untypical. It's not untypical that we have decades negotiations which lasted decades sometimes. And in Martin Walser, I think it was not our directrice now, and not the director, the former director, but the director. The negotiations began for 30 years or so.
In fact, there was a period Martin Walser thought about to give his papers to a private person, a private collection, and our former director, when I came, he was very sad that there was this decision in the literary world, and he always said, "Oh, if you can change something in that way, it would be nice." And I think one of his last things he did was that we invited Martin Walser for a lecture to Marbach, and try to convince him that it's to change. And I think it was 2003 or 2004, and now he is giving us papers, and suddenly it worked. Somehow it worked in this long period.
There were some reasons, I think. The reason was also the following. The offer he had came from a close friend, and he was very rich, and he would pay it much more than we was able to pay him. But he knew when he gives this to this friend, what will happen when this friend isn't no more, because it's a private thing, and if you are a writer and you think over what to do with the archive, you have to think in decades and in hundreds of years. I don't know, and I think that is the main reason also.
One more question?
Nikon, you have a question?
There is another recent acquisition by Marbach, the papers of Handke, so I wonder, and the papers seem to me a bit comparable. So a lot of tremendous amount of diaries, yeah. And so if we compare the archives using this this typology of yours, yeah, chaotic and organized, who was more chaotic or more organized, Handke or Walser? Can we compare these papers, these two writers?
Yes. The papers of Handke are partly in Vienna, partly in Marbach. We have his diaries, and his diaries they are organized because by the way, also the diaries of Walser are organized. All the other things are not chaotic. And why are the diaries organized? Because the authors, Walser and Handke, wanted to work with the diaries. And so Walser had made indexes for each diary. And Handke has, from time to time, he published extracts from his diaries.
Walser published some extracts too.
Yeah. But yeah.
But probably, how much time do we have, Thorsten? Shall we stop at 4 or?
Well, we set this up as a bit a more unusual format, not with just a talk and then Q&A.
We had a bit of a Q&A now in between, but at some point it would be good to move on to Barbara Köhler,
yes.
I guess. Because we have another, in total, 40 minutes.
Oh, that's but probably it's quite interesting to have a different case. And here now the case of also in the beginning a Surkamp writer, also a writer with the mentor Siegfried Unseld. They have the same mentor, but a totally different generation, much younger woman than Walser is, and also a different situation for the papers, because Barbara Köhler died quite young last year, and she knew since, I think, 2 years before her death that she had cancer and that she will die very soon. And so she gave us a phone call and asked, what can I do with my papers and what can I do with my money? I have a little money, I'm not rich, but I have a little money, and I want to find an institution for my papers and for my money, because she hadn't got a family, only some nephews. And so she gave everything with her testament, and gave also a little endowment. So, and we started, and we were in the position of the relatives. We have to go to her flat and just look what can we with our friends, and what can we use for the archive. And it's a total different situation, but probably similar is that both authors are very conscious to be a part of that modern tradition. If you look at this book stack or bookshelf here, you see Samuel Beckett, and she translated Gertrude Stein, and so on. So she really was a part of the avant-garde tradition, and she also was a reader of Arno Schmidt. She wasn't a reader of Martin Walser, I think. That's another view on her bookshelf. Interesting that Happiness is a figure called Hamlet. Of course, she is, as a Shakespeare reader, like that. And this funny picture, if you look at it, first you think it's just crazy, but it's a model of the structure. She often painted models like this of the Odyssey. and it's something like a time system and a model of the Odyssey. It's difficult to understand. But what she wanted to do, one of her major works is the epos Niemands Frau. Niemands Frau. Nobody's wife, it's in English. She tried to tell the Odyssey in a new way, out of the perspective of the women who aren't existing at Homer. And so it's a really interesting modern poem out of a very tricky feminist perspective. But what did Barbara Köhler do? She make analysis of the Odyssey, and she started. That's a normal thing in the archive, but probably I have a picture. Wait a moment. I have to go on a little bit. We have to go further and further. Here that's a last draft of Niemands Frau, and these are some of her notebooks. And you can notice, she started to learn Greek for writing this. And it's interesting because she came originally from GDR and came out of this movement to really to find young intellectuals in the working class. And so she came really from the working class and made this whole educational program in the GDR. Ulrich knows much better than I know, but there was a certain point she was educated in that today Literature Institute in Leipzig, which is something like a creative writing school in Germany, existed in the GDR before, and she made this whole way. And there was a certain point she cannot publish anything in the GDR, in the end of the GDR, because suddenly the security service of GDR took her as a target. Because she had a concept of Western feminism, and they really made a Stasi report with the slogan "feminist" in a masculine form, and the problem was feministic, and it's really oppressing. And out of this situation, she came in the new situation after '89, and then suddenly started as a young poet to publish at Surkamp, and it's really interesting. And all of this you can learn with the papers, but first of all you can learn that she wrote this small volume, 100 pages of poetry, Niemands Frau, and she worked years and years and has a whole bookshelf with Homer stuff and different translations and English translations. So it's really you see that this avant-garde project is really. She really meant it serious.
Kind of dictionary.
Yes, she just practiced and more things. But probably we can go back. It's an interesting figure. It's difficult to translate, of course. These shoeboxes are also interesting. It's a project. It's a project between essay, poetry, and prose. She called it Wittgenstein's Nichte, is Nicey, Wittgenstein's Nicey. It recalls a famous novel, a famous book of Thomas Bernhard, which was called Wittgenstein's Nephew. That's the first association. It's a little bit feminist joke, but in fact, she wanted to read the Tractatus Logicus of Wittgenstein new, and she wanted to find the point where the grammar of Wittgenstein neglects the woman. Then she was really a fan of Wittgenstein, and then you can find all the material for this book in these shoeboxes. And for instance, then she tried to find a way. Here you can find that Surkamp edition of Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus in the 70s, and she tries to find a cover which looks similar as that very popular edition. And so she started to negotiate with her publisher, with Siegfried Unseld, because Siegfried Unseld always thought I have to find for this series my new design. We cannot go back to the old design. And she really fought with him, and in the end, she got the new design. That's the left one with the big author's name. She didn't like, but it's interesting. And the interesting point is not only that she is so close to this Surkamp tradition and the philosophical tradition. The interesting point is also, if you look at this book, the underline is mixed media, and if you look at this material, it's a book with a lot of pictures and also collaborations with artists, with video artists and painters, and you can really learn from these papers that Barbara Köhler had a view on a book like a piece of installation art. So it's like a room. You have the door in the front and you have the door in the middle. And she really thought the little book like a piece of art, like a room, like an installation in the three dimensions room. It's so interesting. And suddenly she really uses the book in every form. You have to turn it around, and everything has a sense, and everything is connected to that Wittgenstein systems. And the point that there are some logical problems. You cannot mean the woman in this for her really important book. She nearly, I think, learned by heart the Tractatus. Really interesting. Time is running fast. So, but somebody says this avant-garde poetry is also a little bit probably you can write everything. And here you can see that serious authors really have a system and really try to find a form which is it's convincing in a modern and new way. We haven't got so much time, but probably one really interesting thing is that Barbara Köhler was really a writer of our generations, let me say. And so she worked quite a lot with computers, and she worked quite a lot with sound and with voice in the computers, but she also worked really like a digital native. And she gave us around 5 MacBooks of all generations. And now we have got something like a born digital collection, which is much bigger than the paper collection. And probably it's a good example for the newer generation of authors working most of their life digital. It's really interesting. And the other interesting is that she her whole life negotiates. Here you can see the Odyssey again. It's a card of a quite famous German photographer, Ursula Ganki. The other thing is that she really negotiates her whole life. How can I say? If you know her poems, you think she's a part of the Western tradition and the part of this that Western Germany and Western Europe avant-garde movements. But she negotiates under that. She negotiates her whole life with her GDR time. And you can find more and more this strange or very, very seldom GDR publication. Do you know this paper?
No, I don't know.
It must be.
There are often very, very few copies. Yeah. It must be under 100 because more than 100 is a publication and it's forbidden. Well, it was forbidden.
Yes, but if you look inside Erwägungen, junge Kunst im Bezirk Leipzig, young art.
That is not an underground publication. No.
I don't think, but it's not very. And you can see here are the first texts of her. But you can also find underground editions. I think that's a very early text. Nobody knows more. But this is an underground publication. This is called Anschlag. Anschlag is a publication.
That's
and that looks like a piece of trash, but they really made a cover out of this egg package. And I think they made a little number of copies. Oh?
Yeah. And sometimes they made it to earn money because they knew that, for instance, Deutsche Bücherei, the greatest library in East Germany. They have to buy everything, no matter what it costs.
But if you have this editions of Anschlag, it's really interesting, the mixture of authors. For instance, they have the text of Václav Havel there in the beginning, and Václav Havel is, yes, it's part of that anti-dogmatic socialist movement, and of course, Adolf Endler is some guy who was very important in the Prenzlauer Berg scene.
Yeah, he was a guy who moved from West to East Germany.
And of course, you have Barbara Köhler, or you have Mircea Dinescu, which is from Romania, which is a really important writer today.
Gerd Neumann is very important in Leipzig. Peter Böttisch, a lot of famous.
So the time is running fast, but this is again an example that you can learn from one author a lot about the complete scene and the surprising connections in the literary field. So, a question.
Yes, I have a question from the chat coming from
Catherine Ahrens. Quote, it seems that the author is at the center of many of your investigations. What about Foucault's author function in light of a publisher like Unzelt, who at times might be a co-writer, other writers in a group, for example? Historical circumstance? I'm asking about moving into the bookness and commodityness of such texts. So what about like the commodityness and the networks that make literature, such as, well, archives, publishers, co-authors, agents, and so on and so forth. And the question that results from that is, how can the archive help us with this?
Yes, the notion of author in postmodern, post-structuralist theories is another notion than we have from an author. The death of the author is not our experience, because all the paper we have from the personal papers are personal papers because they come from one person, and you can't find a connection without the notion of a person, and that means the notion maybe of an author. Of course, there are influences and maybe auch co-worker situations in many manuscripts and in many cases, but I would say the notion of author is necessary, and despite the fact that all these most of the authors are dead. I think in an archive, it's a local where the person is not dead, because every document speaks from a person and from an author.
And you have to organize an archive in some way, and even if you don't believe that the author is so important as it was in the tradition before the postmodern discussion, you have to organize the material in some way. And the principle, the most convincing principle is probably that you organize the material in the form you found it, that you have the provenience, and the provenience is normally the author or a publisher or something like that. But there's another interesting part, that co-authorship, and the question, is it a modern phenomenon or is it something else? And I think it's not a modern phenomena. What is phenomena? It's I don't know. And it's think about the Shakespeare period, and think about who was Shakespeare and who wrote this fantastic plays. Or think about, in the German tradition, Schiller and Goethe. And Schiller and Goethe sometimes take a walk and decided, this is the topic for you and this is the topic for me. And after writing it, they corrected it. So it's very normal in literary life that writers try to to find a first audience in other writers or editors and friends, and try to be in the collective a better writer or something like that. So it's part of the literary life, and it's really very interesting again and again.
And I think the notion co-author is senseless if you don't have a notion of author.
Thorsten?
Yes, I have another one. This time coming from Vienna. Sophie Liepold asks, you mentioned that each of the archives, Nachlass, Vorlass, are so unique. How do they fit into the literary archive? Do the same classification criteria apply to all of them?
The same what criteria, please?
Do the same classification
So.
criteria
Yes.
apply to all authors alike?
Yes.
Or do you have to
Yes.
adjust
The categories and systematics for different authors.
Yes, the classification we do is in order to help the researchers to find what they want to find. And this classification is formal. It's not content related. And this formal classification, it's applicable to, it's not a very strict and rigid classification system, but it's an open system, and up to now we could classify our papers with that classification without greater problems. But but it's if we said every personal archive is unique, then it is more related to the content, not the form of the.
But of course, if you catalog these archives for the researchers and the audience, probably it changed a little bit. In former days, I think 30 years or 40 years ago, they had more they really thought that every author is different, but the papers you can order can put in a similar order. Mm-hmm. And today we are a little bit more careful, I think, and the order of the authors has more importance now. Mm-hmm. than it has in former days. You cannot, it's a problem. If you have something like this here, you can find just a chaos between photos as a child and photos as a young woman with this crazy hair. And you can find some letters there, and it's all and you can find it in a folder on Erwin Panofsky, that big art historian, and Barbara Köhler's papers. It's difficult to really find a way to catalog this chaos, but there are certain points that we really want to beware of things like that. Now we have to beware of something like that shoeboxes in the beginning. So probably in earlier periods, an archive would think it's just a shoebox, but it's because if you know that there's an author, a writer who thinks a book as a room or a box. It's so interesting that she uses for her finished papers these shoeboxes, and so you have to be aware, I think, like this. It's everything in a shoebox, book in a shoebox.
Yeah.
Can I maybe real quick just follow up on Sophie's question and your answer? Like we talked the other day about Thomas Strittmatter, and there's like he will remain a singular case of an author who had an Atari ST. Doesn't that create a formally unique case? And how does that change how you deal with or categorize this part of the archive?
Yes, that was the first time that we have papers with born digitals, and we made a in general, we made the experience that you can categorize a digital document like a paper document. It's if you describe it formal, you can say it is a letter or is it a manuscript in all notions. And you can say, is this a manuscript from the author or from the other author? And you can say it's a novel or notes that are the same categories. And there are some other categories which comes in addition. For instance, you have mostly an more or less correct date, the date of writing, and you have in every case you have something like a title. If you write on paper, you don't need to give them a title, but if you want to store a document, you have to give them a title, how senseless it might be.
But probably
and such things. But the general classification system is not so much changing as we would expect at first glance.
But probably it's going to be more difficult or more tricky to find categories with born digital materials which are newer, because we have today, Strittmatter was in the middle of the 90s, I think, or in the beginning of the 90s, and today we have the hard disks or the computers have so many possibilities and so big storage. So we have so many forms of writing, of pictures, of sound files and something like that. And if you look at I only have looked at one of these hard disks of Barbara Köhler, because I tried to find something on her testament and something like that. And you can find it with such a mix, and I think you have to find new methods to describe this, and probably automatically, because it are masses and masses and thousands of copies and changing things and drawings and everything. So
what you are looking for is a system of new describing without looking at every document for minutes and describe them carefully, but because you can read it automatically, and you can switch through a mass of data which with tools. But what we are trying now is to use all these tools and to know what we can do with that, and then we have to think over how we can make it accessible for users in a good way. And there we are beginners in this field, and we hope for help.
But it's really interesting, and for a writer like this, you have two or three lines, and you don't know, is it a part of a letter, is it part of an email, it's a part of a poem, it's probably just a quote she noted from an essay. Did she think that this could be a part of her art projects? She made quite a lot of art projects in the landscape art with words. So we cannot operate with our normal categories anymore sometimes. So it's interesting. It's really interesting at the future, and we all change our life, our intellectual life, with these machines, of course.
Yeah, we have roughly another 10 to 15 minutes, and my question would be, I saw Katie Ahrens switched on her video. I don't know whether that means she wanted to say something or ask something. No. Shakes her head. Is there something more that you would like to share and show us? Because I know you have a lot of material, and I don't know whether there's anything that you really still wanted to show us in the last 10 minutes?
That's a good question. We made it now so fast. Let's have a view on it. Sometimes you are really so fast. I showed that. Wait a moment. Probably we can have a look on this, because this is also a paper you can feel something of literary tradition. And this mix, if we thought about co-authorship, this is a mixed box of Barbara Köhler. She had a communication with a quite famous avant-garde writer, Oskar Pastior, who came from the generation of Martin Walser with a strong avant-garde concept. And we have here now a mixture of letters from Pastior in a period he wasn't so famous, and he thinks about Paul Celan, and he thinks about single words, and then we have this fax copy. It's things with a letter from Barbara Köhler to Oskar Pastior with some crazy printed Schnee things, snow, probably also, I don't know, I don't think it's a drug, and then she tries to write I think it's a present, she tries to write a poem in the Pastior style in the left wing, and you suddenly find really a thing which was described by the question that the concept, the normal concept of authorship probably isn't an adequate way to describe literary phenomena in our time. And probably that's an example we can find for an ending. And it's really interesting. It's difficult to interpret all this material, but it's really could be really interesting, because it's also a bridge between the generations of Martin Walser and Oskar Pastior and Barbara Köhler, and it's also a communication between two persons who had really dangerous experiences in the former socialistic countries. Oskar Pastior had quite a lot of problems, not only because he had a scandal in the last years that at one point he reported for that Securitate, that Romanian secure system. He didn't report really important things. He just said yes one time and then reported nothing. But the problem behind was that Oskar Pastior wasn't only an avant-garde writer, he was, in fact, he was a well-known homosexual, and he had many problems, and he could go to jail in Romania in this period. And so he was a poor person in Romania who had a very hard life, and it's very interesting. We can also have tell a little bit story on being queer with that material. So, and only one folder, and you can find so many new perspectives on literature. Probably it's a good example for the ending, open ending.
Open ending, or
I have still one other follow-up question on exactly that, and that is, I know the German Literature Archive had just renewed its online catalog system. I heard about it. I surfed on it as well, and you said before, very often you start reading into an author's archive and you learn much more about other authors than just the author that you are looking at. And wouldn't it be appropriate for a digital catalog to enable that kind of investigation, sort of like, to get the context of an author through the other archives automatically by searching the search of like, where does this author pop up in other archives that are also at DLR, maybe even at other archives than DLR? Wouldn't that be a good thing to have? And does your present version of the catalog already facilitate this?
Yes.
It does. By the way, our paper catalog did it too. Because if you are looking for instance, for the manuscripts or letters from one person, from one author, you find in the new catalog, but in the older as well, everything which we have from this catalog, not depending on the question where it comes from. Huh? You can, you can look for several ways, and you can also see what is in the papers of the author. But it's also the possibility to look what we have in different papers from different authors, from one person or to one person. That is realized. But in Germany we have a central database for not only for one archive, but for all archives which participate in this general catalog. And there you find not only everything which exists in Marbach, for instance, but everything from an author which exists on different archives in Germany.
Can you name that meta catalog just for everyone who's on the call, so everybody knows?
Yes, the name is Calliope.
And you can find it on the homepage of that Staatsbibliothek Berlin.
Yeah. And there's also Malwein. Does that still exist?
No, Malwein is an European thing, but it's I think it's dead.
Oh, it's dead.
Yeah.
Oh,
Use Calliope.
bad.
Calliope is
It's a kind of dead end.
Okay. So Calliope is the
It's
is the new Malwein.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think. Well, are there any other questions in the room or online?
Probably it's 4:20. We can stop. Oh.
Yes, I think so. I would like to invite everyone to thank our speakers for this great presentation. And I guess if anybody would care to unmute themselves from Zoom, I think you will be heard in the room if you clap. Like unmute. Well, Katie is shaking her hands. do you see it over there?
Yes, you see it.
Yeah. Okay. So you see the appreciation
nice.
on the Zoom screen. We have a.
This is Jeff Clapp.
Okay. So thank you so much. We really appreciate this insight into the German Literature Archive and into two current collections that have just been acquired by the German Literature Archive. And thanks everyone who was in the room, still is in the room, has joined us on the Zoom call, and to the technical team that is in the room next door and who has been taking care of all the AV and also of the recording. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you.